There's so much real magic in this. I'm so excited for how mind-blowingly cool the show is. Stay tuned for some legit transmissions and how this show can help you be a real magician and raise and elevate in your consciousness spiritually. But of course, major spoilers for all of WandaVision and the rest of the MCU, anything that's been released up to this point. So, if you're an avid fan like me, you might have seen the incredible scene when Monica Rambeau is going through that barrier and gets disintegrated into all of her various selves within WandaVision, and then through sheer force of will, recombines, reintegrates herself, and comes out as Spectrum. Now, canon isn't out yet on that official name, but that's the name that feels like it's gonna stick to me psychically. We'll see if that's accurate or not. But this mirrors a spiritual awakening process taught by so many different spiritual teachers. There's so many different aspects of self, different archetypes that we live during our life, right? With Monica, you saw her during the decades across time through WandaVision and her flashbacks to when she was a kid, and Captain Marvel was involved and her mom was involved. But in life, we have our inner child, we have our inner adult, we have our king, warrior, magician, and lover archetypes. We have the tarot archetypes, where we're the fool, we don't really know anything, all the way up to we're the magician, we're the ascended master. And throughout that, we have the divine masculine of the emperor, the divine feminine of the empress, the tragedy, the life unraveling of the tower, and all those different elements, right? There's so many magical systems in the real world that talk about as you integrate these various aspects of self, you get closer to the oneness. And the Kabbalion, they talk about all is in all. In a sense, the entirety of existence, all gods, all goddesses, all multiverses is the all. That kind of makes sense. That's the classical definition of God, or whatever word you'd like to use. And so as we're going through the spiritual awakening process, once we get fully at peace with more and more of our early childhood traumas and extreme emotional events and different aspects of self, light, shadow, and then some, we can own those aspects of ourself. And as we ascend to oneness, like one of my friends and telekinesis teachers, Max Reeder, teaches, when you want to affect the world outside of you with a siddhi, a legit magical ability, that happens from a state of oneness, from a state of awakened awareness, a state of enlightenment, even if it's just for a flash. Whether it's in an altered state of consciousness brought about, however it's brought out, a lot of the mystical things I've experienced, like affecting the weather, affecting animals, rapid healing, legit telepathy, most people in the world over the age of 20 or 30, if not younger, have had these significant mystical experiences. So sure, WandaVision, Marvel, Disney, Hollywood, you get all these special effects and these exaggerations. But even Steve Jobs, who left everybody the book, Autobiography of a Yogi, at his funeral, that book talks about Paramahansa Yogananda, one of the first yogis to visit the US and talk about the spiritual awakening path of yoga more than just the hatha movements that are popular today. And Yogananda, Steve Jobs' guru or mentor, had these travels all over India in that book, seeing all these superpowered yogic beings, people who could live without breathing, without eating, who could materialize objects, who could create smells, who could heal the sick, raise the dead, all these high-level supernatural abilities we hear about ascended masters doing. We hear about St. Joseph of Cupertino, and there were thousands of people, including kings and queens, who said they saw him levitate multiple times. Dean Radin talks about these in Real Magic, and in other fiction transmissions, like Lev Grossman's The Magicians, they say magic comes from pain. So looking at this and looking at WandaVision, what does it mean when Wanda, in her extreme grief, has this massive power amplification? In Age of Ultron, which I just rewatched, she's kind of figuring out her abilities. She's mastered a few, but it isn't until Pietro's death that she really realizes she has this huge power to affect and control and fly and do all this other stuff with her skills. But even in Infinity War and Endgame, the skill that Wanda has with her powers in Endgame dwarfs what she had in Infinity War. If Wanda could have taken out Thanos, as, Feige and a lot of other people said she could have, then there would have been no need to blow up Vision's stone. If she really knew the extent of her skills, she could have just said, "Hey, Thanos, what's up?" Froze him in place, ripped off the gauntlet, crunched him into a ball, or sent him into space or whatever, Vision would be fine, the world would have been saved, no need for all that drama. Of course, those movies were awesome, so, I think that was a good thing she didn't do that. But what did it take for Wanda to have this massive explosion of her abilities? So, okay, Agatha Harkness is boosting her skills, perhaps, or manipulating her. Who knows what? Maybe that mirrors the case of when dark entities can come in to a person when that person is vulnerable and kind of affect their being. And not to scare anybody here, but that's just like an infectious bacteria or a microbe coming into your body when your immune system is exposed, right? When your immune system is, say, compromised, if you get a cut and you don't take care of it and you get an infection, you could say there's, negative entities in the physical realm that are coming in to take control of your body. Look at Candida. If you have a crappy diet, you have bacteria that make you crave certain food that's not good for you, so they can feed off of it, and there's ways of cleansing that from your system. But if you're vulnerable, say if you went through a tough breakup and you're, binge eating or comfort eating, you might feed that, parasitic bacteria without really being aware of it. So Wanda, in her extreme grief of losing Vision and losing her brother, could have been open to the influence of Agnes's, of Agatha Harkness's intentions, of her, dark desires. And maybe Wanda didn't know that she was being manipulated until, just now, and Agatha actually took the chance to tell her and to let her know. So what can this mean for us? How can this be valuable for us? You see Monica moving through, breaking through, claiming her power when she's triggered by that past memory of Carol. I guess we'll figure that out in the future. That fuels her. And in the Magicians, when they say magic comes from pain, that's a very, very clear mirroring of the effect that I learned in healer school, where they say the wound is the gift. So if you think about, there's a lot of spiritual teachers out there, and they talk about a lot of us who have early childhood traumas, or a lot of them, or grow up in an abusive household or a very challenging environment, we get very sensitive watching out for danger, and that heightened sensitivity grows to empathy later in life. And if we hone it, that usually gives rise to a predisposition to psychic abilities. And then if we train those, we can use those for good, as a light worker, as a healer, as whatever. So the pain we experience earlier in life, when we come to terms with that, especially when we heal that, when we integrate that, it allows us to be of service. Hey, thanks, Majestic. Nice to see you. So it allows us to be of service. So Wanda, even though she had the pain of, that Stark missile that almost killed her and her brother, and her parents dying, and all that stuff that we hear about in Ultron, she leverages that to serve others for the greater good. And when her telepathic link to Pietro fires off, when she's aware of him dying, her power grows exponentially. She realizes, wow, other people are suffering as I have suffered. And just to take a little bit of liberty into what she might have been thinking, she wants to take greater responsibility with great power and help the world, make the world be a better place. But we see in Civil War that Wanda still didn't have full control of her abilities. So what does it mean that Agatha came in? Is Agatha a blessing in disguise, or is Agatha just purely dark? Well, look at this with Doctor Strange and Dormammu. You could say Dormammu was the big bad. He had all these dark intentions, wanted to spread pain and suffering. But if that nemesis wasn't there in Doctor Strange's hero's journey, would Strange have learned how to use the Time Stone as quickly as he did? Would he have toughened up? Right? If he hadn't gone through being murdered by Dormammu over and over again at that end of that movie, would he have had the stomach to go through 14,605 versions of the coming conflict in Infinity War to find the one strategy that worked in Endgame, which essentially was, Professor Hulk snap and then Tony snap? And by the way, I plan to get a Professor Hulk tattoo. I think his hero's journey is phenomenal, integrating the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde stories. I think all of Marvel has all these rich transmissions of, there's a certain element of self that we may disown, for example, anger. And when we can fully own it, when we can fully see it, when we can fully accept ourselves, that allows us to control it. Not to say that we should always control everything. As the ancient one said, surrender is key, and then that's what helps Stephen kind of break through that part of the hero's journey in that movie. So what can we learn from Monica becoming Spectrum? To me, this was the most inspiring scene of any Marvel movie. The two runners-up are when Ego is teaching Star-Lord how to make essentially a chi ball. That is a legit technique. If you studied Qigong, which I've studied in practice and I teach formally, if you look at the links in the description, you can harness the energy of your body, you can harness the energy of the planet for healing, for clairvoyance, for a lot of other different things. Acupuncture is insured by almost all the states in the United States now. Yeah, we needed fMRIs and stuff to show the validity of that 5,000-year-old practice, but Marvel is teaching us through parable, through these little breadcrumbs, that we have these expanded capacities. And while I started studying, psychic abilities, healing, astral projection, tarot when I was 14, all that started from watching the movie The Craft. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but that was a show about teenage witches. And when I saw it at 12, I'm like, oh, I want to shoot fireballs and levitate stuff and do all this super magic. And thankfully, I read a book that was written by an author named Sylva Ravenwolf. And she said, a spell is just a focused form of prayer. And a Buddhist book I was reading at the time said, a prayer is just a type of self-transformation. So that got me into positive psychology and personal growth and that whole self-help, self-improvement genre, which was great. So what does it mean for us then to see that Monica, through sheer force of will, developed her skill, right? She wasn't part of an accident or maybe an Eternals manipulation. That's not a spoiler, it's just a guess, where Hulk got his abilities, or even Iron Man, where his arc reactor, his mini reactor, came just trying to survive. But Monica wanted to do good. She wanted to be of service. She wanted to help and free and support other people, and she put herself at risk, right? And she talks about her backstory, cells metastasizing, cells in remission. So maybe she didn't have as much to lose as, say, maybe Jimmy Woo or Scott Lang. But Monica literally risked her life, risked her free will, as she admitted, just to save the people of Westview and largely the people around the rest of the world. Like if Wanda could expand that hex and absorb anybody who was near its perimeter at the end of episode 6 with essentially one act of will, sure, she was scared for Vision's life or afterlife, whatever, fake life, simulated life, whatever is actually going on there. I think Monica is one of the most noble people in the MCU. Now, my second most inspiring scene after the Guardians, which I would put at number 3, is when Janet Van Dyne came out of the quantum realm and essentially I cried tears of joy, did energy healing on Ghost. This was one of the most noble acts of selfless service I think we've seen. Here was a woman, Ghost, who is literally trying to kill Janet to keep herself alive. And when Janet came out of the tunnel, she didn't say, oh my gosh, here's this person who can, phase her fist through my husband's throat and possibly kill him just because she wants something and she's, selfish and evil. Janet's like, oh, you're in pain, let me help you. And Janet put her hands on Ghost's head and that white light came out and Ghost stabilized and like, yay, they're teaching Reiki, this is so cool. So, while you might not have the experience or opportunity that Monica had, again, this is a work of fiction, this is Hollywood special effects, this is an exaggeration, but I believe that culture is changed through Hollywood. I believe that we can transmit certain cherished ideas through entertainment. Neuroscientists say that when you're watching TV, when you're watching movies, your brainwaves go in an alpha state. You're more relaxed, you're more receptive, you're more open, you're more impressionable. Some folks say that's why they call it programming, right? Or TV programs. So regardless of all this stuff about that and the Matrix theories and Elon Musk saying we're in a holographic reality, I think there's so many parallels that we can learn from this show. So comment below what you would do if you were faced with a scenario where you had to jump into an incredible challenge for some deep motivation and that you wanted to, with that, do good in the world, like Monica. all the powers that Monica's getting, the comics say all the stuff about her as Spectrum, like beyond Omega level mutant. Thank you, Eric Voss. You're fantastic. I love what you said about her. But, even being able to challenge Wanda's abilities and break through that hex and keep her free will intact. Even if that's all Spectrum can do, Wanda's super powerful, so that means Spectrum is equally as powerful or more powerful. And to have somebody like that who is a good person is such an asset for the MCU. And I think it's such a great teaching for our world at large. Wanda she volunteered for an experiment to Hydra. She was given her powers through experimentation. She was kind of evil, seeking revenge. Then she was pretty good. And then because of her grief, she turned evil. And the question is, how much of her was actually evil? When she said to Monica, right before the big reveal of Agnes being Agatha Harkness, and Wanda was like, maybe I am, the villain. I'm like, oh my God, she's actually okay with being a bad girl. And we haven't seen that type of character development in the MCU before. We've seen Thanos, who was definitely a multi-layered, multi-dimensional character with a fantastic story and a fantastic growth arc, but we've never seen a good person go bad. Sure, like Cap and Tony had their disagreements in Civil War, but each of them had a very good reason. And I think, anybody with any basic understanding of psychology can understand that Tony was probably extremely triggered when he learned that Bucky killed his folks, right? When we're triggered, our amygdala is firing off. We saw Tony was prone to such things. He had PTSD after New York. Heck, all of us could be. If you went through an alien wormhole and almost died and didn't get to say goodbye to whoever you loved most, that might leave an impression on you. But eventually, Tony accepted it. When he vaporized Bucky's arm in Civil War, he didn't vaporize Bucky's arm and then walk over and incinerate his head and kill him. He's like, okay, the threat to my life is neutralized. I don't need to continue to seek revenge here to the nth degree. I think his rationality came back to a fair extent. So for Wanda, I think the biggest curiosity is, how much does she have free will? If Agatha is using her powers, if Agatha's using Wanda's powers to create and maintain the hologram to a large extent, then does that mean Wanda would have done that on her own without Agatha's intervention? And I think this is a real key point for all of us. A lot of mystery schools had the word mystery in them for very good reason. As Dean Radin, author of Real Magic, a great inspirational mentor, said, when we talked once, he said, if magic were ubiquitous, the world would erupt in a ball of fire in 30 seconds because some angry teenager would do some Dragon Ball thing and be angry with some hormone spike and just vaporize everything, right? And so thankfully we have these safeguards. We as human beings, most of us gain in strength slowly through puberty, and that happens when most of us are in primary school, and we learn, hey, you really shouldn't punch other people. Not only is it illegal, but you can actually hurt them, and it's not something that you want to do with this enhanced skill, this enhanced power that you have as a human being. But in the world of magic, there's so many systems that teach how to have extra skill, extra abilities, and unless somebody else also has those abilities, it's generally untraceable. So one of the reasons that I like to teach ascension and advanced spiritual abilities and things like that is to do so in a safe way where people who are curious to practice can do so responsibly. It used to be you had to be selected and take oaths and take vows to go through a mystery school. Or you had to be part of a religious faith and there was an entire community around you, or you're in a monastery for 10 years, wiping floors, calming down your ego before you learn the advanced stuff. But now there's so many advanced teachings out there in books, on YouTube, everywhere that actually are legit, that I want to help people not just level up in their skill, but do so in a way where they can't be agonist. We'll have to find a different verb there. But I think if Wanda had more psychological growth, if Wanda had more fortitude, Wanda, I love you, but speaking to you as the fictional character in the MCU and even in the comics beforehand, I think if Wanda had more psychological stability, I think if she had stronger mental health, I think if she had a circle of mentors and friends and maybe other magic users that she could talk with who could help her understand her ability and not just learn how to control it better, but really instill discipline that, the events of WandaVision that happened wouldn't have happened. She wouldn't have needed to essentially take Tony Stark's barf technology up to the nth degree. Um, and, we see this in X-Men. So Professor X essentially mind controls Jean Grey to prevent Phoenix from getting out there. And, it's said in the comics and in the shows and the movies, and there's different versions through the different stories, should they kill Jean to prevent Jean from killing others, the whole preemptive strike thing. And a lot of philosophies and a lot of people say that type of action is okay, that type of action isn't okay. I'll leave that up to the ethical philosophers. But what I would offer is, if you are inspired to develop your spiritual abilities, if you're inspired to ascend spiritually through the path that feels to you of most integrity, really consider that if you do that in a mindful way, if you do that in an intentional way with a good heart and open mind and a dedication to serve humanity and support humanity's spiritual evolution as a Bodhisattva, then you'll be more of a Monica and less of a Wanda. And even though I feel for Wanda, even though I love her, I do think that if she went to some grief counseling, she might not have stolen Vision's body or might not have been open to Agatha's influence. I'm a little bit irked at Doctor Strange for not noticing this and not taking Wanda under his wing first. But once the stones were destroyed, remember, Doctor Strange went away in the blip and he came back for the endgame battle. And then that was only a few weeks before the events of WandaVision. So Strange might have been so busy because if the Time Stone was the main thing keeping this universe together, as the Ancient One said, and the Time Stone was his way of seeing different versions of how time could play out, Strange might be, literally, as we see in the title of his next movie, defending the Earth, or at least Earth 616, against the Multiverse of Madness. And even if he wanted to be a little bit unstable, he didn't intervene before. He was around. The Ancient One was around. And so taking out the perspective that it was karmically permissible or okay to leave Wanda or all that stuff that was meant to happen should happen, I think if Strange really had the bandwidth, if there weren't all these other big bads he was fighting off in those few weeks, if he had the bandwidth to check in on Wanda more, then he could have prevented some of the stuff. He could have helped it and he could have supported it. Now, I don't know where he's been this entire week. In the show, WandaVision, it takes place over the course of a week. I know for us it's been a much longer time frame. But I think if Strange was aware of what was going on, either he would be more powerful than Agatha Harkness, or less powerful, or an even match, or unknown. And if it was, even borderline, he could have, summoned the help and summoned the support. Because for how powerful Wanda is, she is such a great asset. And because she's, a bit of a swing vote versus good or bad, and her anger and her change came from pain, just like Magneto's shift to the dark side came from the pain of seeing his mother, murdered in the X-Men First Class series. I think that there is still an opportunity for Wanda to be redeemed. So we'll see in the next episodes here and in Multiverse of Madness what actually happens with her. Does she need to be eliminated, according to the characters there? Can she be redeemed? Can she be saved? Can she use her powers for good? Or is she too mentally unstable like Jean Grey because of the powers within her and she's just open to influence? So I hope this was interesting. I hope this was fun. This is my first video in a Magic of Marvel series. This is something I felt called to do and wanted to do for the longest time. So, I have a lot of content out there teaching about this stuff, and I'll be releasing many more videos about WandaVision and just the magical transmissions of Hollywood and popular culture in general. Because just like during the Inquisition, which when she was still, a light worker, I'd say, J.K. Rowling had some great things to teach us historically in the history of magic that she published through Pottermore. There's a lot we can learn about life, philosophy, ethics, being of service, caring for others, being a light worker, doing good in the world as people who just want to grow our capacity. And I feel the spiritual abilities we all innately have access to in our evolution, in our spiritual growth, in our personal growth, those are innately human skills. And before we just jump off the bandwagon and learn them, like any good martial arts teacher would do before admitting somebody to his school, we need to do that inner work. We need to do that emotional healing. We need to really make sure that we're aware of and we've worked on our own shadows before we go out and level up in power. This might be a bit of an inflammatory point, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This is kind of why gun restriction laws are in place in a lot of areas, because I think in my own personal opinion, if somebody isn't psychologically stable, they shouldn't have a lethal weapon. There's a lot of other ways to protect oneself. And magic in the MCU and in this world has a significant ability and a significant potential to also affect reality in a huge way. And I'm talking about Earth, not Earth 616 in the comics. I'm talking about breaking the fourth wall, like you who is watching this and what you are capable of. So if you're curious about my motivations behind this video, behind this channel, behind my path, check out my video, Why Awaken Humanity, and check out my book, Magicisreal, which is linked in the description. And if you would like a community of other people curious about this stuff, growing in these ways, leveling up in inspiration, leveling up in love and kindness and magic and ascension and spiritual awakening, definitely hit me up. But definitely go to magicalgoldenage.com and pop in your email, because I'm building an entire community for like-minded folks to be of service, to all grow and heal together responsibly, so that we can become Monica's and not Wanda's. Or I guess if you're not sure about Wanda, at least not Agatha's, because if Agatha is the one that is affecting everybody's free will and everything else in such a negative way, which I would think is more likely the case, then that's something to watch out for. All right, thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I so appreciate you. I am so grateful to you, and I'll see you on the next video.